Welcome back, everyone. No one in the town of Cold River remembers exactly what year it began. They only know that one winter, more than a decade ago, a young woman living alone in a house on the outskirts called 911 in the middle of the night, her voice shaking but strangely controlled. And that call eventually became the key piece of evidence that opened a string of linked home invasion cases across several states, enough to bring the FBI in. That woman doesn't live in Wyoming anymore. The house has been sold, the walls have been repainted, the furniture replaced. Even the old wooden porch was torn out and rebuilt in metal to keep termites away. But the people who once handled that file, the ones who carried the paperwork in their hands, they still remember one thing clearly. It was not random, not accidental, and not a one-off incident. The story begins in a house nearly 8 miles outside town, where cell service cuts in and out, and at night the only sound is wind scraping against glass. The homeowner at the time was a young student, living alone while her parents were away. No one thought a remote place like that would become a target, but that isolation, that was precisely why it was chosen. When it happened, the timestamp in the report left no ambiguity, 2:01 a.m. But to understand why that hour matters, you have to go back a few weeks before that night, to when the first signs appeared, quietly, unnoticed, until it was already too late. A few weeks before that call, nothing about her life suggested danger. She was finishing her semester remotely, spending most days on campus and most nights alone in that house. The routine was almost boring. Work, eat, study, sleep. The kind of repetition that makes a person believe the world is predictable. The first disturbance was small enough to dismiss. One night, around 11 p.m., she heard what sounded like gravel shifting outside the back steps. Not footsteps exactly, more like weight shifting on loose stone. She turned off her lamp and listened. Nothing followed. The next morning, she told herself it was probably a raccoon, maybe a deer straying too close to the fence. She didn't mention it to anyone. A few days later, she noticed the motion sensor light near the garage had tripped sometime during the night. The bulb was still warm when she stepped outside at sunrise. That was when she realized a detail people rarely notice unless they're looking for it. The snow near the driveway wasn't smooth anymore. Something had pressed into it and melted part of the surface. Not clean tracks, just a shape that meant weight. She stood there longer than she needed to, holding her coffee, staring at it. Not scared, just unsettled, without knowing why. That same afternoon, a UPS driver told her in passing that he had seen an old truck idling at the bend in the road the past 2 days. He assumed it belonged to someone local. She nodded, thanked him, closed the door, and forgot about it. Or tried to. The third sign was harder to explain away. One evening, returning from campus, she found the side gate slightly open. The lock wasn't broken. It had simply been unlatched from the inside. She stood there in the cold with grocery bags cutting marks into her fingers, trying to remember. Had she left it that way? Could the wind do that? Did animals push gates from the latch side? Nothing logically fit. But the mind prefers easy answers when the true ones are intolerable. She closed the gate. She didn't call anyone. Patterns always look like accidents until they have a witness. After the third incident, she began to change very small things. The kind of changes only someone who has been unsettled would notice in themselves. She pulled the curtains tighter at night. She turned the porch lights off earlier. She stopped standing in front of the windows when she talked on the phone. And whenever a truck passed the bend in the road, she instinctively stepped deeper inside, instead of watching from the porch. Not because she was convinced someone was watching, but because a very small part of her awareness, the part people like to call instinct, no longer believed everything was normal. The next Friday night, close to midnight, she was sitting in the living room when the outdoor lights flickered once and died. Not because of the motion sensor. The main breaker had been flipped, as if someone had touched it. She stayed still, waiting for a second sign. Nothing came. 5 minutes later, the lights came back on, as if nothing had happened. The following morning, taking out the trash, she noticed faint hand marks along the rim of the bin. Not oil, not dirt. Something that looked like sweat dried on a cold surface. There were at least 3 of them. The hand size was that of an adult male. She didn't tell the police, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she feared she had nothing solid enough to be believed. People who live alone know that fear well. The fear that if they speak, someone will say, "You probably misremembered." It was the wind. It's nothing. 3 days later, around 1:20 a.m., she woke to a sound that wasn't loud, but was absolutely intentional. Metal tapping on glass. Once. Clean. Not wind. Not branches. Not animals. Something with a hand and purpose standing there. She didn't turn on the light. She stayed still, eyes open, breathing deep and steady. When a person is fully conscious in fear, they do something primitive. They categorize sound. She counted the gap between taps, 12 seconds. Then a second faint tap, like someone checking to see if there was movement inside. This time she stopped inventing kinder explanations. The next morning she left the house early and stayed at the library all day. When she came back, one thing was different. The back doorknob had a fresh horizontal scrape, the kind made by a blade or a pry tool testing a lock. That was week 3 since the first sign. And at this point, anyone who later reviewed the file agreed on one thing. It was no longer coincidence. They didn't leave right away. They did a final sweep around the perimeter of the house. One officer scanned the backyard with his light, the part the porch bulbs didn't reach. He suddenly stopped, then called the other officer over. There were handprints on the rear window, grease-smudged, visible, wiped in a hurry but not clean, like he had touched it, tried it, and only one thin layer of glass had stood between him and her. When they returned to the living room, one officer said it plain, flat, with no comfort in his voice. "You did the right thing not coming down. 20 seconds slower, and this would have been a different report." Throughout the interview, Noah did not cry. She did not scream. She did not shake. She simply sat still, like someone whose language had been removed, her eyes fixed on a single point on the wall, as if her brain had not yet caught up to the fact that she was still alive. One officer asked the question they always have to ask, as procedure. "If we had arrived later, what do you think would have happened?" Noah did not answer, but the silence after the question was the answer. When they left, one of them came back to the door and instructed her, "Keep the lights on, don't shower, don't sleep. If you hear anything again, call immediately." The door shut. The police cars rolled off the gravel road. No more footsteps outside, only the naked truth of a night that almost became evidence. There were no more sounds that night. Noah sat in the chair until the eastern sky went pale, not because she chose to stay awake, but because her body would not allow sleep. Every time her eyelids sagged, her brain replayed the image of another hand on the door. At 9 a.m., the police returned for a second statement. They showed her a printed map with 5 red marks within a 40-mile radius of her house. 5 addresses, 5 homes with women living alone. 5 calls placed before dawn. One of those 5 was not just a call. In the 4th case, the victim was assaulted in her own living room. She survived, but doctors say she remembers nothing of his face, because the brain locked that memory to keep her alive. Reading that, Noah did not flinch, did not make a sound, did not ask for more detail. She only said one sentence, in a voice that sounded like she was narrating herself. So he just came to the wrong house this time. The officer corrected her. No, he came to the right house, just the wrong night. No one in the room tried to comfort Noah. No hand on the shoulder. No, you're safe now. Only the word event recorded exactly as it occurred. 3 months later, Noah left the state. Not because she needed a change of scenery, but because every knock on a door, whether a mailman or a neighbor, made her body react as if a knife were sliding through the frame. She never returned to McCall, never walked the dirt road by Huckleberry Lake again. The house was listed for sale, then changed owners. 2 years later, in another state, police arrested a serial intruder. Details, height, hair, the "my car died" pretense matched. When they emailed the file for Noah to confirm, she replied with only 4 words, "I don't need to." Not because she forgave him, not because she was afraid to look, but because the truth does not change the endpoint. If she had walked down those stairs 20 seconds slower, this story would not be told. It would be documented. And that is where it ends, not as a legend, not as a campfire scare. It ends the way true case files end. A woman is alive simply because she did not open the door. Welcome back. It was the kind of small southern town you could drive through without ever realizing it had a name. A handful of brick buildings, a gas station with a single flickering neon sign, and a church steeple that leaned just slightly to the east. The town was called Ash Grove, tucked somewhere between the endless pine forests of Alabama, where the humidity clung to your skin like a second layer of flesh. Back in the summer of 1983, folks around there didn't talk much about what happened. Those who did, well, they never said it the same way twice. But if you asked the old sheriff, the one who still sat outside the diner with a cup of coffee and a faraway look in his eye, he'd tell you this. It wasn't no man. It wasn't no animal neither. And that's where this story begins. The first time anyone saw Eli Carter, he was walking down County Road 9, just as the sun dipped below the trees. He looked like any drifter you'd see in those days. Denim jacket, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, a face roughened by sun and silence. He said he was a carpenter, passing through on his way to Mobile for work. The Wilkins family took him in. Good church folks, Robert Wilkins, his wife June, and their daughter Mara, who was 12 at the time. They ran a little roadside diner called June's Table, known for its biscuits and thick black coffee. Eli offered to fix up their old porch in exchange for a place to stay a few nights. Robert, being a kind man, agreed. He gave the drifter a room out in the shed behind the house, small but dry and safe. That night, June said she woke up to the sound of hammering, just one sharp thud echoing in the dark. She looked out the window toward the shed. The light inside was on. Eli's silhouette moved slowly back and forth. She thought nothing of it. Maybe he couldn't sleep. But by morning, the hammer lay on the ground, and Eli was sitting outside the shed, staring into the trees. "Didn't sleep?" Robert asked. "Couldn't," Eli replied. "There's something in those woods." Robert laughed. "Yeah, mosquitoes." But Eli didn't smile. He just kept staring, as if the trees were watching him back. The following nights grew stranger. Mara was the first to hear it. She told her mother there was a whispering sound coming from the woods behind the diner, like people talking just out of reach, repeating her name in a slow, dragging drawl. "Mara, come here." June brushed it off as childish imagination, but when Robert went out back to check, the woods fell silent. Too silent. The cicadas stopped, the wind died, and for a split second he thought he saw a shadow, tall, thin, pale against the darkness, moving between the trees. When he told Eli about it, the drifter's face went white. "You heard it too, didn't you?" "Heard what?" "The grove. It calls people, sometimes." Robert frowned. "What are you talking about?" Eli didn't answer. He just muttered something under his breath, a prayer maybe, and went back to sanding the porch boards. That night, June woke again around 2 in the morning. The hammering sound was back, steady and slow. Thud, thud, thud. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the shed. It was coming from the woods. A few days later, the sheriff stopped by the diner. He was an old friend of Robert's, Sheriff Tom Avery, a heavy-set man with eyes that had seen too much. He asked if they'd heard anything strange lately. Robert hesitated, then nodded. Tom sighed. "Got a call from the church down the road. Reverend claims someone's been digging behind the cemetery at night. Says he's found holes, like graves, but empty." June went pale. Mara asked quietly, "Mama, are they digging people up?" Tom patted her shoulder. "No, sweetheart. Probably kids fooling around." But when he looked at Eli, who was sitting in the corner of the diner staring out the window, his tone shifted. "You a church man, son?" "Used to be," Eli said. "Used to be. Till I built one." The sheriff chuckled uneasily. "You built a church?" Eli nodded. "Up north. Didn't last long." He didn't explain further. Later that night, a storm rolled in. Thunder so loud it shook the walls. Robert went out to secure the shutters, and that's when he saw it. Footprints in the mud leading from the woods straight to the back door of the diner. Bare feet, small ones. He followed them with his flashlight, heart pounding, until they vanished right at the edge of the grove, where the trees twisted together like blackened fingers. That's when he heard it. A child's voice. "Daddy?" He spun around, light trembling in his hand, but Mara was inside, safe in her bed. The next morning, Eli was gone. His duffel bag, his tools, everything. In the yard, Robert found a small wooden cross, hand-carved, stuck into the ground near the porch. There were symbols etched into it, strange spirals and lines that looked burned into the wood. Sheriff Avery came by again when they reported Eli missing. He took one look at the cross and muttered, "Lord have mercy." June asked what it meant, but the sheriff wouldn't say. He only told them to stay inside after dark. That night, the whispering came again, louder this time, surrounding the house. It sounded like many voices, overlapping, chanting something low and rhythmic. Robert loaded his shotgun and stood by the door. June clutched Mara close, whispering prayers. Outside, lightning flashed, and for a split second, they saw them. Figures, standing at the edge of the grove, dozens of them. Their faces were pale, hollow, mouths moving but making no sound. And in front of them, Eli. He held another wooden cross, larger this time, and his eyes, they were black. Robert shouted his name, but Eli didn't react. He drove the cross into the ground, right at the tree line, and the moment it touched earth, the whispering stopped. Complete silence. Then Eli looked toward the house and smiled. By morning, Eli was gone again, but now there were dozens of crosses planted all through the woods. The sheriff brought in men to cut them down, but every time they tried, the air turned thick, heavy. like the whole forest was holding its breath. One man said he heard singing beneath the dirt. That night a fire broke out in the grove. It burned hot, blue and silent. No smoke, no crackle, just a wall of light rising between the trees. The townsfolk gathered on the road, too afraid to go near it. Sheriff Avery said it was lightning, but Robert knew better, because in the flames he saw faces, dozens of them, screaming, writhing, clawing to get out. And right in the middle stood Eli, motionless, his eyes reflecting the fire. The blaze burned for 3 days. When it finally died, there was nothing left but ash and the faint smell of burnt pine. The crosses were gone, so was Eli. Ash Grove never recovered. The diner closed, the Wilkins family moved away, and the woods were fenced off. Folks said nothing would grow there anymore. Not grass, not moss, not even weeds. But sometimes, when the wind was just right, people swore they could still hear it. Faint whispering from deep within the grove. In 2013, a young filmmaker came through, making a documentary about forgotten Southern legends. He interviewed the old sheriff, Tom Avery, now in his 70s. When asked if the story was true, Tom just stared at the camera for a long time before saying, "Son, I buried 4 men who went into those woods, and I never found one body, so you tell me." The filmmaker laughed nervously, but that night his camera, the one he left rolling in his motel room, caught something strange. At 3:17 a.m., a whisper came through the mic, a single word, "Mara." And then the frame flickered for less than a second, showing the outline of a wooden cross, burning blue in the dark. Now, I don't know what you believe. Maybe Eli was just a drifter who lost his mind. Maybe the grove was cursed long before anyone ever built a church there. But if you ever find yourself driving through southern Alabama and you pass a stretch of dead trees with ash-colored soil, don't stop. Because they say, when the wind dies and the air goes still, you can still hear him hammering out there in the dark. Thud, thud, thud.